Hi, we are Group 7 and our project is based upon paper as art throughout the world and how these arts have developed over time. We will begin with the oldest works of art and continually work our way to the present time period. Hope you enjoy. Throughout history, many physical materials have been used as surfaces for artistic purposes. Some of the earliest known forms of artistic expression include cave paintings, dating back to the Paleolithic Age. The Cave of El Castillo in Spain is considered one of the first and one of the most well-known forms of cave paintings, originating approximately 40,800 years ago. Following the Cave of El Castillo, the Chavet Cave arose in France around the time of 30,000 BCE. These early cave paintings had common themes. These depictions often were of wildlife such as bison, deer, horses, as well as tracings of human hands. These primitive artists utilized natural resources such as pigments, minerals, and charcoal to compose their art on the stone walls of caves. Later on in the course of time, papyrus began to be used as a surface for art. Earliest known papyrus was manufactured in Egypt and Sudan around 2560 BCE. Papyrus was derived from strips from the pith of the papyrus plant by cutting it and placing it together in layers, then beating it and drying it to create a laminated sheet. Papyrus was drawn and painted on as an artistic surface throughout history. Some of the more famous ancient papyrus paintings have been discovered in Egypt, featuring magnificent designs and depictions of their culture. Parchment began to be used as a substitute for papyrus around 250 BCE. Parchment refers to an animal skin that has been scraped and dyed under tension. Skins from goats, sheep, and cows were commonly used. Parchment craft continued for a while, as it provided for an excellent medium for artistic expression. Styles of drawing and painting on paper have changed drastically since its creation, yet the basic elements of paper remain the same. In earlier periods, paper could be used to draw and paint on with pigments. Around 500 AD, illuminated manuscripts began to be made with paper. These were texts as supplemental illustrations and decorations that were often made with gold or silver. In more recent times, paper has been used for art such as printmaking and watercoloring. In addition to this, paper is used for sketching, writing, painting, and displaying photographs. It is an extremely versatile and useful medium for art. Rembrandt van Rijn was a Dutch painter and etcher. He is generally considered one of the greatest painters and printmakers in European art and the most important in Dutch history. His work consisted of numerous etchings and portraits that were considered innovative at his time for portraying the empathy of the human condition. Leonardo da Vinci is widely considered to be one of the greatest painters of all time and perhaps the most diversely talented person ever to have lived. According to art historian Helen Gardner, the scope and depth of his interests were without precedent and his mind and personality seemed to us superhuman. Many of Da Vinci's initial thoughts and creations were stored through the use of paper, which helped Da Vinci capture his ideas in a tangible form and portray them to the general public. Many of Da Vinci's writings and diagrams are frequently referenced in the modern day through the help of paper. Michelangelo was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, poet, and engineer of the High Renaissance who exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of Western art. He was one of the most famous painters in his day and is often considered to be one of the most famous painters of all time. Many of his most well-known works, such as the Madonna and Child, were initially drafted on paper before they were completed. Japanese paper lanterns are made from paper with a frame of either bamboo or other types of wood and have a lit candle inside as a light source. Traditional lanterns are made of images of myths, things from nature, and/or the spirit of a local culture. Modern lanterns are made in various images, ranging from traditional dragons to pop icons. They symbolize joy, celebration, good fortune, and longevity, and also have a role as protectors from evil. Lanterns made from paper do not last as long as lanterns made from other materials, such as silk. They are still used because they carry powerful symbolism. Oftentimes, these lanterns are associated with festivals. The word origami comes from the word ori, which means folding, and kami, which means paper. Traditional Japanese art of paper folding has been practiced since the Edo era, which is the time period between 1603 and 1867. The goal of this form of art is to transform a flat piece of paper into a sculpture through only folding and sculpting techniques, which means no cutting or gluing of the paper to make the sculpture stay together. Modern uses of this form of art include stents, packaging designs, and other engineering structures. The word washi comes from the words wa, which means Japanese, and shi, which means paper. Washi is a style of paper which was developed in Japan. It is created by using fibers from the bark of the gampi tree and the mitsumata shrub, or the paper mulberry tree, and is used to describe paper that is made by hand in the traditional manner. Washi paper is generally stronger than ordinary paper made from wood pulp, and is used for clothing, household goods, toys, wreaths, and tape. Music and the notations it represented has been invented and reinvented several times in the course of history and continues to evolve today. From basic indications of a simple song line going higher and lower, the complexity of a musical notation has grown so that it can now specify in detail all the music for a 100-strong symphony, orchestra, and chorus. We know that music has been a part of human culture for many years, and was probably part of the cultural growth which took place in Europe between 60,000 and 30,000 years ago. Although ancient wooden artifacts tend to rot and decay over time, instruments made of bone last much longer. Two simple flutes dated to 43,000 and 42,000 years ago were discovered in Germany. One was made from a bird's bone, another from mammoth ivory. It is safe to assume that the techniques of making instruments and playing music were passed via an oral tradition for many thousands of years, with people copying and sharing musical ideas across the generations. However, without recording techniques or any form of musical notation, we have no idea what the music of these early periods sounded like. The earliest known example of a complete notated musical composition, a song complete with lyrics, used a method of notation developed by the ancient Greeks. This piece of music is called the Sikolos Epitaph. It is carved on a tombstone in Turkey, and it most probably dates back to the 1st century AD. The Byzantine Empire developed the equivalent of the Western solfa scale in the form of notation based on pitches being higher or lower than the previous one. The alternative to the solfa method of indicating the notes of a scale was a letter system used today with notes represented by the letters A through G. The exact pitches were still not specified at this time, only whether notes should be higher or lower than the previous one. This problem was fixed by introducing horizontal lines to the music notation. Firstly a single line, but before long all music was notated in churches and monasteries using a system based on the stave of 4 horizontal lines. The stave of 4 lines is usually attributed to an Italian Benedictine monk called Guido de Arezzo. While the complexity of musical notation grew, the process of writing down music remained both expensive and laborious. With the invention of the printing press in 1492, it wasn't long before the concepts of printing text were applied to the printing of music, and the first attempts of this were made in the 15th and 16th centuries. In England, Elizabeth I granted Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, his pupil at the time, a monopoly to print and publish music. This resulted in their works becoming widely known. Elsewhere in Europe, the development of printed music helped to give composers a degree of independence from their wealthy patrons, since they could earn an income from publishing their music. The printing of music also helped to standardize notation symbols, since there was less room for the inevitable variations that arose from handwritten music. We often view books solely as a means of receiving the written word or viewing images, but for some modern artists, this convention is not necessarily true. Takeshi Ishiguro is one example of an artist who defines the norm when it comes to books, as shown here. It consists of a lamp superimposed into a book. This would be a great addition to your nightstand if you are an avid reader or literary scholar. Kara Board takes a common image of a book and skews it into many shapes and sizes, sort of like a literary contortionist. In these examples, you notice some very striking images which are made by taking an everyday item and warping it in odd ways. This causes the viewer to see the books as art rather than containing art, looking at a book rather than through it. Robert Thie uses books to convey certain messages to the images he creates. He is most famous for his gun books, which are books he has cut apart to resemble firearms. This imagery can be very striking as books and guns have often been viewed as independent and sometimes as oppositions to each other. Putting these two opposites together causes the viewer to contemplate the fine line between the power of the pen and the power of the sword. Olaf Eliasson takes the viewer's imagination and makes it paramount in the situation with this book. This book, with images of houses cut out of the pages, urges viewers to imagine their dream house through the cutouts. This form of art is highly engaging and promotes visualization as well as exercises a person's imagination.